we're saying that God has a plan for all of our lives. And the plan cannot be one that you put on the shelf. It cannot be something you lay aside. It's something you got to really embrace, and you got to do it with urgency. But then in the process of going ahead urgently to complete what God has assigned to you, we sometimes get wounded. And the wound can be physical, it can be emotional, and it can be spiritual. In this case, I believe it is more physical than spiritual. And some time ago, we were given the need for a prayer request for a Gerard Bryant. And then we discovered later on, Gerard is a very good friend of our son, Solomon. And so because it was so in sync with what we're talking about, we want to talk about it a little bit today. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We have people from around the world who are listening. So could you just tell us who you are, where you are from, and your name?
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you all are. My name is Janie Bryant, and I am Gerard Bryant's mom.
All right. And the reason that we are talking to you this afternoon, because what happened to your son fits so uniquely in our conversation. So your son is a tremendous athlete, as we heard. So the question is, when he got wounded, when he got injured, what went through your mind? I mean, what did you think regarding his career as an athlete and even as an individual?
So when we first learned of the injury, it was this past spring. He had a torn labrum, and our initial feelings, both Gerard and I, we were let down, we were disappointed, we were kind of devastated. I think Gerard was angry, just because he had been playing football since he was like 5. So to get to your senior year, and deal with an injury that we never had to deal with previously, I think it was just a big blow, to both of us, just mentally, and how we were going to overcome it, because we knew that we could play, but we knew the risks were high, and that's how we ended up having to get surgery, because we made the decision to play, and then ultimately he ended up doing more damage to that tear, as well as having significant bone loss that caused us to have the surgery and put his senior season um, to an end.
Interesting. Beginning playing at about 5, all of the years, and then you come to your senior year where you are about to graduate from high school, and who knows, go on to college, or who knows, go on to some kind of a big league, or whatever the case may be. So we hear that when it happened, all kinds of emotions got into the picture, including the idea of being angry. And we heard her say that they decided, even though there was this injury, they were going to try to see if they would be able to go ahead with it. But in the process, it got worse. So when it got worse, did you try to give up, or did you try to do something about it?
Well, no, so my thing, I have this motto that, and I tell Gerard all the time that you can't stress and pray. So when we initially got the news, I immediately just started praying. And what I did was I just gave it to God, and I just said, whatever is supposed to happen, we're just going to trust that you just have your hands in it. And I just left it alone. So I gave it to God, Gerard gave it to God, and then we just kind of put on our armor, and we just moved forward as such.
Now, you said something heavy. I had a friend long, long time ago, when he heard something that was very profound, he would say, heavy, heavy, heavy. And you said you cannot stress and pray at the same time.
Mhm.
Talk about that a little bit. What do you mean by you cannot stress and pray at the same time?
So a long time ago, somebody told me I was going through something and somebody kind of shared that with me. And basically what it means is that if you're stressing and praying, that means you're not trusting God. And one thing that, I was brought up on and that I try to instill in Gerard is that, nothing really is possible without God. So if I'm giving it to God, if Gerard is giving his injury to God and he's asking him to protect him, then we're not going to stress about it. We're believing that God is going to move how he's going to move, and whatever's supposed to happen is going to happen. It becomes, oh,
Wow, that is awesome. That is beautiful. So, 5 years old, about to graduate, senior, then something happens. You have this philosophical, this theological, this sociological view that guess what? You cannot stress and pray. So you make up in your mind, we wouldn't stop because the objective is for him to play. So you go to the doctor and the doctor says what?
so when we go with the injury that caused us to have the surgery, Gerard dislocated his shoulder during a practice. And ultimately, what we were advised was that if he dislocated that shoulder during the season, whether it was practice or a game, he would ultimately be done. So I think for us, once he dislocated that shoulder, we kind of knew from there that this was it. But again, we knew that this was the end of him playing, but this wasn't the end of God's plan. And that's kind of what I instilled in Gerard also, is that while, it's not the ending that we wanted, everything doesn't take a traditional route. So maybe the goal is to play at the next level, but maybe you do that through a prep school or JUCO or some other way that God has laid out that we just can't see right now.
So you put the whole process in 2 dimensions. While this particular time he will not, it doesn't mean it is the end, but we'll continue on. So you go to the doctor does surgery. How did the surgery come out? How did it turn out?
I mean, I think just everything leading up to it and just going back to your teaching of overcoming, like that was very beneficial to us because what I would do was take back the notes that I had received and I would share them with Gerard just to kind of make sure his mental, was pretty stable. And he understood that, we're going to overcome this physical thing and this spiritual hurt that you feel. It's temporary. So we've just really been focused. The surgery, I mean, from the beginning to the check-in to the checkout, everything was absolutely amazing. And that's why for me, it was confirmation that God was he was involved in all of that. Because I mean, the lady at the front desk to all of the nurse techs, I mean, everyone was wonderful. And then to kind of top it off, one of his nurse aides was actually the mother of one of his former teammates. So, I mean, to have a surgery where everyone is in tune and you don't have any worries, that just kind of let me know that, this is bigger than us. God is using my son as a testimony to be able to share this story with you all today and with the next kid that comes up and has a season ending injury or a family that's dealing with something similar.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. The final question that we have for you, you've alluded to it some, but I want you to just now, really, really talk to us about it because 5 years old, started playing, everything's okay. Just before you come to your last final senior year of playing, then something happens. You get angry, but then you do not let that stop you. You have this belief that you can overcome. How did you see God in all of what transpired then, now, and in the future?
That's a good question. I just think I guess what I can say is there was never a time where we didn't see God. So, like, we knew throughout this entire experience that God was involved in this. I mean, there were a lot of things that took place because we transferred schools to follow a coaching staff that we really believed in, and just trusting God from the very beginning. I think God just always, He just dropped little tidbits to let us know, hey, I'm still here. It looks rough and
Mhm.
you may not like it, but I'm still here. I mean, even the night that Gerard got hurt, and it was the end for him, just the way that these men, his coaching staff kind of just rallied around him and just supported him. That was another reminder that this is God. This isn't us. This isn't man. It's God. And while it looks a certain way, the outcome is going to be different if we believe. I mean, another thing I say is that your faith has to be stronger than your fear. And I think our faith, and I've shown Gerard, I've been the example that my faith is very strong and is much stronger than my fear. So God has always been in the picture. It's never one of those things where we asked him. We knew that he was here and he was allowing us, he was ordering
Wow.
our steps.
Wow. Your faith has to be stronger than your fears. We thank you so very much. Listen, is Gerard able to just say hello to all of us?
He is. Hold on.
Thank you.
Hey, how are y'all doing? Thank
We're
you for the
doing fine by
prayers.
God's grace. And you?
I'm great.
Excellent. Excellent. I want you to know that you're on our prayer list, and we're going to continue to be in prayers for you. We're going to stand on your mother's faith, that we are going to have a faith that is stronger than our fears. And we look forward to one of these days, even talking to you to share with us your experience in all of this. God bless you both. Thank you all so much. And talk about reconciling with once you heard the basics of her faith. You cannot stress and pray at the same time. And not only that, but your faith has to be greater than your fears. Why? Because in all of your life, even before you are formed in your mother's womb, God knew about you. God had a plan for your life. And that's why when you trust him, no matter what happens, she said, God gave little tidbits here and there. We want to thank God for them. And we know by the grace of God, with that kind of faith, the best is yet to be in the life of Brother Gerard. We're talking about this business of being able to complete your earthly assignment, being able to complete the plan of God for your life. And what we're saying is that based upon Hebrews, the 12th chapter, verse 1 and 2, that we are surrounded by others who have done this thing before. We're not the first. We're not going to be the last. There were others who believed in God, but it was not all easy for them. For example, you have the incident with Joseph. Joseph had a dream of greatness. But then what happened? From the dream to the demonstration of the dream, in between, he went through a lot of things. His brothers were jealous of him. His brothers sold him into slavery. In slavery, he was lied upon. And then he was placed in prison. And you will want to ask yourself, if God is going to bless me to be on the top of my game, what am I doing here in the pit? What am I doing here in prison? But that's what happens. You have to just keep trusting God. So Hebrews 12 tells us we are surrounded by so great of a cloud of witnesses. But what we need to do is to examine ourselves and see if there is any extra weight that would keep us from running the race. Because when God gives you a dream, when God gives you an idea, It is not for you to drag along with it, be cool, be indifferent, be nonchalant, just going along with the program. No, that's not the idea. The idea is that when God gives you a dream, you've got to run with it. In the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, it tells us that you got to write the vision. And it took me a while to understand something about that verse. It says, write the vision, and it should be so impactful, so transformative, so powerful that when someone sees the dream, they grab hold of it and run with it. Like we heard Sister Brian said that in one of these teachings, she heard the talk about overcoming. And that's the truth. Believe it or not, God is not interested in victims. That's why he's done everything necessary. He gave us his son. He gave us his word. He gave us his Holy Spirit. He gave us prophets, priests. He gave us everything. Why? Because God wants us to be overcomers. We are overcomers. And that's why we read in 1 John chapter 5 that whosoever is born of God overcomes the world. Yes, we are overcomers. So because we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, we've got to run. We can't drag. We can't be cool about it. We got to hasten, because you heard it said before, work while it is day, because the night comes when no one can work. You got to finish your work. You got to finish your assignment. You got to finish your task. You got to finish what God has entrusted into your care, so that when the end comes, you can, like the Apostle Paul said, I fought a good fight. But I didn't just fight. I finished my course. But in the process of running, things can happen. We get wounded physically. We get wounded emotionally. And we get wounded spiritually. So how do we repair, reposition, and keep moving? We heard today what Brother Gerard and his mother has done. He didn't just go home and nurse his wound and say, this is the end of it. No. No. We serve a God who can make dry bones live again. We serve a God through his son, Jesus Christ, who can make the dead to wake up again. And my thing is that if God can cause dry bones to live just because of wind, of prophecy, he can make the bones come back together because of doctors. We serve that kind of a God. He's an awesome God. He's a great God. But we get wounded. And when we get wounded, you don't sit down, you do something about it. If it is physical, you have doctors. If it is spiritual, we said that the first thing you want to do is to reconcile with God. You see, because if you are actually truthful about it, somewhere in the conversation of your life, you want to ask the question, God, why did you allow this to happen? You say you love me, and I say I love you too. Why did you allow this to happen, God? We all have a tendency to question God in some aspects of our life. So the first thing is you want to reconcile with God. You know, sometimes we hear people say, you know, you got to love yourself. You got to know yourself. You got to master yourself. You have to have self-control. You have to learn to deny yourself. To your own self, be true. Know your purpose. Know your mission. Know your goal. Embrace yourself. Develop yourself. Deploy yourself. We hear all of those things and they sound pretty good. But let me tell you, they are the benefits of being reconciled with yourself. Once you are at peace with yourself, it is easy to love yourself, know yourself, master yourself, be self-controlled, deny yourself. You can do all of those things. Why? Because you've come to understand your greater purpose. And not only that, but you are at peace with yourself. And the individual that we're utilizing as an example was the man called David. David was a king. David was very well renowned. He came on the scene as a result of the destruction of Goliath. He was awesome. But then something happened. He was carrying a weight. It was the weight of sin that he had committed. So if you listen to his prayers, you will notice that in his prayer, he does what we're talking about. And that is, number one, to be reconciled with God. Listen into what he said, Psalm number 51. Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love, because of your great compassion. Blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin. He wanted to make sure, God, I've done wrong. I want to make it up with you again. Friends, you have to be real with yourself. God calls you to be alive. God has a plan for your life. When you think, when you feel, when you know you've done something, you said something, you thought about something, you acted in a manner that was not in consistency with the will of God for your life, then what you want to do, don't try to argue, don't blame anybody, go to God and say, God, I'm very, very sorry for what happened. Please forgive me. That's what David did. So number one, be reconciled with God. Then you have to own up to your own mistake. Don't blame anybody. Look at what he did. He said, for I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. I recognize what I've done. I recognize the failure in my decision. I recognize it. I don't need anybody to be held accountable for it. I don't need anybody to be held for what I've done. I did it and I hold myself accountable. He said, against you and you alone have I sinned. He came to the realization, God, you've been good to me. You've been mighty, mighty good to me. I was in the fields as a shepherd. When the prophet came to anoint the new king, my own family did not want to even acknowledge my presence. My daddy didn't want to bring me to the forefront. It was the prophet who had to insist, do you have another son? And then look what I've done. It was against you, God, that I sinned. I have done what is evil in your sight. You see, sometimes we think God doesn't see it and God doesn't know about it. But David's reminding us, God sees everything. He says, I've done what is evil in your sight, and you'll be proven right when you say it in your judgment against me. Then he tried to shift the conversation here in verse 5. He says, I was born a sinner. There's one time he's trying to give some excuse for what wrong he's done in his life. He says, I was born a sinner. And what does he mean when he says, I was born a sinner? He has reference to the original sin. When Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3 sinned against God, all of the children that came out of them had a proclivity, had a bent, had a disposition toward doing what is wrong. And so he says here, I was born a sinner, yes, from the moment my mother conceived me. Yes. But then he says, but you, O God, desire honesty from the womb, teaching me wisdom even from there. So even if you're born in sin, it does not negate the fact that you know the truth. Because you are born in sin does not mean you don't know when you've done wrong. Even if you're born in sin, you know when you've done wrong. And so he's acknowledging, he's coming to terms with himself. And that's what we all need to do. Stop blaming people for the decisions you've made in your life. Know that God is a forgiving God. Know that God is a God of a second chance. Know that God is not only, as Solomon would say, he's more than a God of a second chance. He's God of endless chances as long as you are willing to ask. As long as you're willing to get up. As long as you're willing to keep pressing on. God is going to give you another opportunity to make life better. One more verse. He says here, purify me from my sins, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. So he realizes, he acknowledges here that if things are going to get better, he's asking God, God, please, will you take away the conscientiousness, the desire, the proclivity to do wrong? Will you please take it away? Because if not, there's a high probability I may do this thing again. So I need you, God, to purify me from my sins, and I'll be clean. Wash me, and I'll be whiter than snow. We'll continue on tomorrow talking about being reconciled with yourself. Because once you are reconciled with yourself, once you are at peace with yourself, it's easy for you to love yourself. It's easy for you to know yourself. It's easy for you to master yourself. It's easy to have self-control. It's easy to do what Jesus said, deny yourself, to be truthful with yourself, to know your purpose, to know your mission, to know your goal. It's easy to know all those things because those are the pillars for your progress. But the key is you've got to learn how to be at peace with yourself. We shall continue on tomorrow by the grace of God. In Jesus' name, amen.